What is up, basketball fans? Welcome to the NBA Outlet. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, my co-host, Kory Waldron, and regular guest on the show, Dalton Pence. What's up, fellas?
Nothing much. What's going on, Nick?
Dalton, always a pleasure to have you on the pod. Nick, once again, we're rolling through the preview series.
Rolling through, and today we're talking Houston Rockets. Before we get into that, though, quick reminder, you can find the show on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, Dash Radio, and YouTube. Also head to Design-Tree/Off the Glass, grab some OTG merch. But before we talk about next season, we'll look back at last year. Rockets 53-29, fourth in the Western Conference, knocked out in the second round against Golden State. How would you summarize last season in one emoji?
Well, I'm gonna try to explain it. I'm gonna go with the one that it's almost like a smile, but it's a nervous smile, kind of like an anxious, not necessarily anxious, but kind of like You know what I'm talking about? The one with the,
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. For what the Rockets were given in terms of the injuries and everything like that, I mean, James Harden had an absolute historic season offensively. So, I mean, it wasn't all bad, but definitely not the finish that Houston was looking for.
The emoji I went with is the guy who's got his hand covering his face. It was a disappointing season. I want to say it was disappointing to a degree because obviously the Rockets have had these title aspirations, and they've come up short 2 years in a row. And last year, I just feel like it stung more so because you look back to the year prior and you think that was our real chance to make it to the NBA Finals. And of course, we had the Chris Paul, James Harden separation. So for me, it's just the hand covering the face because it was a disappointing end to a year.
Yeah, I went with kind of similar to Kory. I went the cursing emoji because it felt like everybody in Houston was like mad from Chris Paul to James Harden to losing in that series when Kevin Durant wasn't playing. And I mean, at that time, a lot of people expected, hey, this is the Rockets' chance. Like, this is kind of the script flip. You know, Chris Paul got hurt in the Western Conference Finals, and then Golden State was able to win. KD's hurt. Now Houston can kind of capitalize, and they couldn't. So I think it just made everybody pretty much upset that, like, hey, we're still not good enough to beat Golden State. But what would be the biggest positive takeaway of last year?
I mean, it has to be James Harden if we're looking at it. We've been looking at the Rockets of being tooled to beat the Golden State Warriors, which ultimately came up short in that goal. But, I mean, you have to applaud James Harden and how he essentially ascended to a new level that I was not even sure that he could get to. And let's see if he can sustain that this season. But, I mean, he had an absolute juggernaut offensive season that kept the Rockets afloat for 3/4 of the year with Chris Paul, Eric Gordon, and Clint Capella all out for stretches of the year.
Yeah, I think the biggest positive takeaway has to be that James Harden got better, which is kind of weird to say. And maybe not even better, but the scoring output was definitely better. He made his case for MVP without a doubt. I think like some positive would be like they got some really good contributions from a guy like Daniel House. Some role players, when they were kind of decimated with injuries, did step up to help this team. But more or less, the biggest positive is that James Harden has just shown that he's that guy.
Yeah, and shout out to Dalton. He actually wrote an article last year before the season started, how can James Harden be better? And I think he really was better because you just think about it in this situation, he was obviously getting more attention, doing more things because of the injuries the Rockets had. And for him to have a season like that and almost win back-to-back MVPs was huge. But what was the biggest negative takeaway?
I have to go with Chris Paul because even when Chris Paul was healthy, or I guess you could say healthy because he was on the court, but he was battling with a slew of injuries with the hamstring and the knee and stuff like that. But when he was on the court, he just looked a step slow. Didn't look like he was his old self that we had seen. It looked like Father Time had struck Mr. Paul quicker than Rockets fans had hoped. It just seemed like the bread and butter go-to plays that Chris Paul had kind of tooled himself with throughout his career just weren't working. The pull-up threes that weren't needed. You know, Chris Paul's always been kind of fancied for his pull-up mid-range game, but definitely was shying away from that, especially in the playoffs last year. So it seemed like it was just like, buddy, what are you doing? A lot of times. So I'd have to go with Chris Paul as being the biggest negative, unfortunately.
I definitely think Chris Paul was a big negative for this team. The injuries and then him just never really getting into form, kind of showing the age 33. For me, like a big negative was just Clint Capella in the playoffs. We just kind of saw his flaws as a center. Obviously, he only averaged like 9 points per game. The rebounds were okay, but he was played off the court at times. And we found out that you can really neutralize Clint Capella in their offense. And when you take away the easy buckets at the rim from Clint Capella, it just messes up the Rockets' floor spacing. So I think Clint Capella's lack of a good playoff run would be my biggest negative takeaway.
Yeah, and I think there's a concern that he didn't get much better last season. There was some improvement, but not enough as much as you probably would have hoped. But I think it was just pretty much like you said, Kory, the supporting cast in the playoffs, and like Dalton said, Chris Paul, Clint Capella, just guys weren't stepping up. The only guy who was pretty good other than James Harden was probably Eric Gordon. So if your supporting cast doesn't play well and you're going up against a really good team, even without Kevin Durant, you're not going to win. But moving on to next year, talking about the rankings. OTG staff has Houston coming in at 6 in our power rankings. Thoughts on this? Too high, too low, or fair?
I mean, I'd say it's fair. I think that they'll finish. I have them pegged for a third place finish in the Western Conference, and I feel like I'm being generous because I don't feel like I'm giving a lot of credit to Utah or Denver or maybe even Golden State. Who knows? So 6 is fair to me. I think it may be on the little bit of the high end just because I'm not 100% sure how the Westbrook-Harden marriage is going to work, but the good thing that is giving me some optimism is the fact that they are returning a supporting cast that Harden is comfortable with and guys that know the system and have played in the system as opposed to previous years where it's having to throw a bunch of new guys in and see where the fits are. So D'Antoni's got some of his work cut out for him, but the Westbrook thing's on a whole different scale.
Yeah, I think 6 is fair. They're taking out one superstar in Chris Paul and bringing in another. Obviously, the friendship between Westbrook and Harden you like to see. But again, this is a guy who's going into a heavily three-point generated offense, and Westbrook is just not a three-point shooter, and he's shown that so far in the preseason. So I think 6 is fair because we really don't know what we're going to get from Westbrook, which is a weird thing to say, but we really just don't know what version of him we're going to see next to James Harden. So I think 6 is fair.
Yeah, I think 6 is fair. And to be honest, I think you could make an argument for them to be a couple spots lower behind, like the Jazz or something, because the Jazz are probably a better overall team. But when you have two players of Westbrook and Harden's caliber, it's going to pretty much bring you up to the top 5. But players in Russell Westbrook, Ben McLemore, Tyson Chandler, Thabo Sefolosha, Ryan Anderson. Other than Westbrook, do any of these guys excite you, Dalton?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say excite me. I understand with the Rockets cap situation, pulling off the Westbrook thing was already something that I was definitely not expecting. Not necessarily exciting. I'd like to see what Ben McLemore does in a very diminished role. I like one of our biggest flaws is rebounding. So I guess you could say Tyson Chandler would be a sort of an excitement for the role that he's going to play. And definitely getting Ryan Anderson, not for $20 million a year that we were paying him previously about 2 years ago. So getting him back on a smaller deal, he knows the offense and stuff like that. But not necessarily anything that excites me.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being frank, I could care less about almost all of these moves.
Right.
Because I just, like Dalton mentioned, none of these guys are going to make a giant impact. Like, you may get one or two Ben McLemore stretches. I think Tyson Chandler's impact comes in the locker room these days. I mean, obviously, a good veteran presence to have. I think they need that kind of veteran presence. And as you mentioned, I think they were 28th in the league in rebounding last year, so it doesn't hurt to add another capable rebounder at that department. But none of these guys really move the needle.
Yeah, Chandler at least gives you a solid option. Capella could play good minutes. They play a decent amount of small ball, so it's not like they need two centers, but at least you have somebody you can go to. But what are your expectations for Westbrook, and what do you think his stat line will look like this season? Same with James Harden, because obviously these are guys that have had the ball in their hands a lot over the last few seasons, and they're not necessarily used to playing well with others to an extent.
I'm going to start with Harden because I feel like this is more of an easier one. I think that with Westbrook, I think it's going to take him a while to kind of get the cohesion down with the supporting cast. I honestly think it's going to be easier for him and Harden to mesh together than Westbrook and the supporting cast, just because I think that Westbrook and Harden work out a lot more than people seem to think. I think that Harden, I mean, you could still see 30 points per game. I don't think it's necessarily maybe going to be that much. I think we're looking maybe like 28, 29 on maybe 40, 36, 89 shooting splits. Westbrook's a little bit harder to predict because you really just have no clue. I think we're looking probably about 23, 24 points per game is what you'd be looking at. I think that most of the points are going to come from them. I'm more worried about that three-point shooting percentage. If he can shoot somewhere close to 30%, I mean, that's got to be a win for the Rockets.
Yeah, I think Harden's stat line, I still think it's over 30 points per game because just looking at this offense, like Harden still has to be the driving force for this offense. Maybe not 36, but maybe like 31, 32. I expect the rebounds to be right around 5 or 6. The assists to remain around 6, 7. Westbrook, I don't, I don't know. Like, I think he's gonna still get the rebound. So this team has an issue rebounding, and that's the one good thing about Westbrook is this guy's gonna battle rebounds, maybe take a couple away from Clint Capella. But I wouldn't be surprised if Westbrook averaged, let's say, like 21, 10, and then probably like 9. I think the assist numbers take a slight dip this year for Westbrook. And then again, shooting split wise, I'm not worried about Harden. He's going to be, a 44-36 guy. But as you mentioned, Dalton, can Westbrook just have a 3-point shot that you actually are scared of him taking, or at least you don't want to leave him open for? But again, he shot like 4 for 20 so far in preseason from 3, which is not promising.
Over or under 33% for Westbrook from 3 this season?
Oh, under.
Oh, most definitely under. If he's hitting 33% of his threes, I mean, you're really looking at a dangerous Rocket squad.
Now, moving on to departures, we mentioned Chris Paul's out, Kenneth Faried, Iman Shumpert. Other than Chris Paul, do you wish they were able to retain Shump or Faried?
Well, giving up maybe Shumpert just because we had to kind of package a first-round pick to get him in the first place. So just watching him walk for nothing in that regard was kind of, a little bit of a sting. And I still think that Shump could live up to his role in Houston, but the three-point shooting just wasn't there. There was the game in the playoffs where essentially he kept us in the game and eventually put us over the top. Kenneth Faried, I mean, he was a good locker room guy, but in terms of his actual role, there wasn't that much to look into there. So really, there's not too much to kind of dwell on in terms of the departures.
Kory, any thoughts on Faried or Shump?
There's nothing to say. I mean, I'll say Faried played really well when the Rockets needed a small ball 5. Obviously spent some time with the Brooklyn Nets. Kind of showed that he could at least be a formidable center. Don't think you're losing too much, but I think he definitely showed that he can still play in some sort of role in the NBA last year in Houston.
Yeah, I think he can be, a guy at the end of your bench. And Shump, I'm actually surprised hasn't gotten a contract. Not that he was amazing, but he did kind of bounce back a little bit over the last few seasons. And obviously that wing position is always important in the NBA. But moving on to next season, what's the biggest X factor for the Rockets that's not a specific player and not health?
Oh, well, you got me. I was thinking health. Well, if you're looking at this team, I think that the X factor, Kory mentioned that rebounding, the Rockets were 28th in the league. That has to change at some point. I mean, there's been too many opportunities where they give up second and third chances in one possession, and they do that multiple times a game, which is one of my biggest pet peeves when watching this Houston team. They've got to get better at rebounding. I hope that Westbrook serves as a little bit of an alleviation for that. But Clint Capella's got to get stronger both mentally and physically. He gets bullied too much down low. We have to get some type of rebounding help from other guys as well. So I think that rebounding's got to be at the forefront of my X factor.
Yeah, rebounding was my X factor as well, but I'll go a slightly different route and just say playmaking as well. This team did rank 28th in assists per game with 21.2. Obviously, this is an ISO-heavy offense with James Harden, and maybe more so last year was more ISO-heavy because they had this long stretch without Chris Paul. But you're going to want to get other guys involved. And then the one benefit of having a guy like Russell Westbrook, even though you can say his assists are sometimes stat patty, Westbrook does look to get other guys involved, whether it's Clint Capella in some pick and rolls, whether it's driving and dishing. So just having another dynamic playmaker in Russell Westbrook who can play more up-tempo, because I think the difference between Chris Paul and Westbrook is that Chris Paul, you kind of have to slow down slightly, especially with how he was getting older. Whereas Westbrook, you're going full pedal to the floor and you're rushing up and down the floor. So I'll say playmaking.
And Westbrook can get you some transition buckets, and that's not something Houston's probably done a ton of the last few seasons. Having a guy like Westbrook can get you an easy bucket here or there, just take a rebound and go coast to coast. But I just went with the dynamic between Westbrook and Harden. We know they're great friends off the court, but trying to fit those styles together is going to be difficult, and it's going to be a big factor in how good their season is. But what's the starting lineup on opening night?
Obviously Westbrook and Harden are taking the backcourt. Clint Capella and PJ Tucker in there. You could say Eric Gordon, which I'm going to go with. I think that, as much as people think that Eric Gordon will come off the bench, I think that he's going to be the guy that they put into the starting lineup. He's shown that he can definitely play third fiddle or fourth option, depending on how you look at Clint Capella. If it's not Eric Gordon, it's going to be Daniel House. So I know that D'Antoni wants to find that wing, that 3-and-D wing, and bringing back Daniel House was kind of the plan all along. So the plan for him is to get significant minutes. I'm just not so sure that it's in the starting lineup.
Yeah, the wing position's weird. So I have Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Clint Capella, PJ Tucker as my lock-ins. And then I think, that small forward position is going to be between either Gary Clark or Daniel House. And I think Daniel House probably gets the nod just because he did have a very good regular season last year. Even though I think, did he get hurt in the playoffs or did he just struggle in the playoffs?
He was just a no-show.
Right. Okay. Well, I'd still go with Daniel House.
So rumblings in Houston have been that Eric Gordon is going to start. So I'm going to go with that and Westbrook, Harden, Gordon, Tucker, and Capella. But it would probably make sense to start one of the other guys. That way you can kind of keep Gordon in the six-man role, which he's been really good in. But
bench unit sounds trash in that scenario. Just wanted to say that.
The bench unit, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I would probably elect to keep Gordon, but they've mentioned starting him this year. But player to watch for the Rockets.
I think it has to be Eric Gordon. In my mind, in the past, especially since Gordon's been here, the offense and even defense, because Eric Gordon, I think, is an underrated defender because of the effort that he employs. But Eric Gordon kind of brings this offense to a new dynamic when he's on. And he's a guy that has an underrated ability to get to the rim and finish around the bucket as well. So I think if he's hitting his shots, which is big because we know with Westbrook and his shooting woes and stuff like that, Eric Gordon hitting his shots gives the Rockets a lot of needed floor spacing, especially when Harden's off the court and he's big in that second unit alongside Austin Rivers and company. So I think Eric Gordon has to be the obvious choice for me.
For me, it's Russell Westbrook. I think trading away Chris Paul, bringing in a guy like Russell Westbrook, you're continuing the fact that your championship window is right now. Westbrook, obviously, in the prime of his career, maybe even on the decline of his prime, if you want to take in the fact that he's had like 6 straight knee surgeries in the offseason. Going to be 31. And he's the X factor because in this league, you are driven by your superstars. This team has they have 2 superstars. They have James Harden and Westbrook. But can Westbrook be an efficient superstar alongside James Harden to help push this Houston Rockets team to those title aspirations that they've had the last 3 years? Obviously, Westbrook last year with shooting splits of 42, 29, and the god-awful 65% from the free throw line, which we didn't even talk about the fact that it wasn't just like the shooting woes. It was just like Westbrook just lost his ability to put the ball in the hoop almost unless he was right at the rim. So does Westbrook start to find some efficiency, whether that's at the three-point line or just getting to the free throw line and hitting his free throws? Because I think if he's not hitting his three-point shot, but he goes back to like a couple years ago when he won MVP and he was averaging 10 free throws a game and shooting 84%, that's a dangerous part of that offense because then you have Westbrook and James Harden who are both drawing like 20 fouls a game and giving you 20 free throw attempts a game, which is what I think would make them extremely dangerous to have that much, charity stripe line shots.
And it makes it harder to defend because now you can't foul.
Exactly. So I think Westbrook's the X factor to me because you need that controlled chaos that he can bring, but you need the efficiency.
Yeah, no, both great picks with Gordon and Westbrook. I'm going to go with Clint Capella. We mentioned him earlier, not taking a huge jump. Now he has a different point guard in town in Westbrook. Chris Paul is one of the best, but Westbrook's also good too. So maybe he can kind of find a groove with him, build some chemistry, and just continue to expand his game. And I think take another step defensively. In the past, he showed some switchability. Last year, we didn't probably see as much of that. So hopefully he can get healthy and have a big season. But what's worst case scenario for this Rockets team?
I think the worst case scenario is that this marriage shows that it's not going to be able to work I'm not going to say from the get-go because it's too hard to tell, but we're at playoff times and the Rockets still show that there's not a lot of cohesion between the two stars, and the Rockets just have to roll with two sets of iso ball, and who knows, I mean, honestly, that might be the offense anyways, but it's going to depend on how well that marriage is going to work. Worst case scenario, they get the 7 or 8 seed and just completely disappoint throughout the regular season. And the future won't be looking bright if that's the case. But that has to be the worst case scenario, I would think.
Yeah, I think worst case scenario would be some crackings in the Harden-Westbrook pairing, a low seed in the playoffs. I still think his team makes the playoffs. But being a low seed and maybe getting an unfavorable matchup with like the Clippers or the Lakers in the round one.
Yeah, you guys nailed it. The duo doesn't work. You get a bottom playoff seed, you get knocked out in the first round. Best case scenario, though.
Well, best case scenario is winning the title and showing that this marriage is a lot better and could work better than people previously thought it would initially. And then obviously, I think that with them winning the title, that would have to solidify Harden and Westbrook being one of the best duos in the NBA. Also, the supporting cast coming to play and putting to rest all of the Westbrook and Harden don't perform well in the playoffs. So I think the NBA title would have to be the clear-cut best case scenario.
Yeah, I think this being one of the title contending teams, quote unquote title contending teams, would be obviously winning a title. But I think overall best case scenario would be them getting home court advantage, and then obviously making a run. And of course, I think the title is like a without said.
Yeah, I got best case scenario. I'm not sure if a best case is winning a championship. I'm not sure if this is a championship level team. Right now, I have Western Conference Finals. Maybe they can prove me wrong. I know, Kory, by the way you said that you weren't 100% confident in putting them in the title contention. Do you think they realistically can win a championship this season?
No, I don't. I don't. I don't. Because I think I'm not I'm not sold on the supporting cast. And again, like Westbrook needs to be so much better than last year. I mean, he cannot perform the same like he did last year. It's just from 2 years ago, his free throw percentage has dropped 20%. His 3-point percentage has dropped 40%. His numbers have got to be better and be more efficient. It's a slight concern. Like, it's 5 knee surgeries or 6 knee surgeries in a row. I know I worry about that. I don't think they're true contenders.
Dalton, any counter for that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's one good thing about Westbrook. Usually he stays healthy for the most part, knock on wood, throughout the regular season, unlike Chris Paul. So I wouldn't envision a ton of James Harden having to go solo. But honestly, who knows with the 82 games that they play in the regular season. But I think you're right. I mean, I think that this team is maybe on the brink of title contention if the supporting cast gives you what would be expected of them. But right now, it looks like they're almost like one of the top teams on the outside looking in.
Yeah, and I think that's fair considering what we know about them. But moving on, what's your actual prediction for the season? And where do they finish in their division?
In the division, I think they finish first. I think that New Orleans could make things interesting, but I just don't see them being ready to contend with them right now. The Spurs are kind of – I think that I could envision a finish just where they were last year, maybe the 6 or 7, maybe 8, best case scenario for them. I think it's first. In terms of the overall scope of the Western Conference, I personally have them third, but that's me being a homer and an optimistic guy. If I had to look at it from an NBA analyst perspective, I'm thinking more along the lines of 4th or 5th, just depending on what teams like Denver and Utah do.
So I have the Rockets finishing with 49 wins, I think second round exit seems about right for me. I could even say that. I mean, they could get 50 wins. I don't think they get home court. I think they finish with either a 5 or 6 seed. I think they're kind of in that same range as like the Golden State Warriors, where there's just a lot of uncertainty for me. And I think a lot of the teams like the Nuggets, Lakers, Clippers, Jazz, I just think they're just more complete teams, like from top to bottom. Maybe not so much the Lakers, but the Lakers have LeBron James, so I'm not going to rule out LeBron James with Anthony Davis as his running mate. But I just don't love the depth in this team. So I think they finished somewhere between 5 or 6. And in their division, they finished. I don't have their division ranked second. I think they finished second.
I think they'll finish first. Their division is San Antonio, New Orleans, Dallas, and Memphis.
First. Yeah. Okay. Yep. First.
First in division, 49 and win, same as Kory. I think second round exit is likely. Would I be completely surprised if they got knocked out in the first round just because of how tough the West is? No, because I think they're likely to land that 5th or 4th seed, and then obviously you're playing a team that's similar in talent, and that's going to be a tough matchup. So it's going to be a really interesting season for the Rockets with that Westbrook and Harden duo. But any other topics you guys want to touch on in terms of the Rockets?
Not really. I do think that we need to mention Austin Rivers as a guy that the Rockets are going to rely on heavily, and I can't believe I'm saying that, but Austin Rivers played himself into being one of the more important pieces of Houston. I mean, bringing him back on a 2-year minimum deal was an absolute home run in the scope of things for Houston specifically. He was huge down the stretch in terms of when Chris Paul was hurt, when Eric Gordon was hurt. He kept them afloat as a second or third fiddle alongside Harden. So I think that we would have to mention Austin Rivers at some point in the pod because he does deserve some kudos for what he did last year. And I think that we'll probably see more of that this year, hopefully.
He's had some good moments for them, no lie about that. Obviously, Austin Rivers isn't necessarily the guy you want to count on to put up big minutes for you or big points, but he's had a decent role in Houston and kind of improved his career. But Kory, any thoughts on you in Houston before you get to League Pass?
I think it's I want to say we're going to talk League Pass in a second, so I'll be able to say it more then. But I think this is still going to be like a fun team to watch, even though I kind of have been so I won't say anti-Rocket, but I've been very red flaggy on this team so far. But I actually do think they're going to be a fun regular season team to watch, just because it's Westbrook and Harden, and I think even though Harden may not be eye appealing to most because of the high isolation basketball. Westbrook, to me, is one of my most favorite players to watch, regardless. And I think him, once again, playing with James Harden, I think James Harden may not be so ISO heavy. So I do think this team is going to be fun to watch.
Well, getting to that, what would you rate them on League Pass, guys?
1 through 10, I'm going probably with about a 7.5, just because I think it's going to be fun to watch Westbrook and Harden play together. And I think that watching Eric Gordon is kind of like an underrated sense because I think that he's fun to watch as well. But the ISO ball kind of gets redundant at times. I watch it about 2,000 times a season. So with Harden doing that over and over and over, it really can kind of water down and make things a little bland. But with the talent of Harden, it kind of keeps it afloat. So I'm going to go with about a 7.5 on the high end.
I went with an 8. I think Harden and Westbrook account for 6.5 of that. But I think this is going to be a fun regular season team because we've kind of mentioned this with some teams. Their play style is less appealing. The Rockets' play style is appealing. The Phoenix Suns, when they were running the 7-second offense, were appealing to watch as well. Teams that are going up and down the floor, scoring a lot of points. And when you have 2 of the arguably top 15, top 10 players in the league on your team, it raises your watchability. And I think this is going to be a fun team to watch, more or less.
Yeah, I have an 8 as well, just for the reasons you mentioned, Kory. You have Westbrook and Harden, you have that amount of talent, and like Dalton mentioned, Gordon can get hot and kind of catch fire, and that's fun to watch, just dropping bombs from 3. But what TV show would you guys compare to the Rockets? This can be based off of watchability or plot.
Oh, if I had to go with absolute, I'm gonna go with The Walking Dead. And hear me out on this when I say this. I'm not saying that these guys are that old to where it's like they're they're about to pass or anything like that. But I'm saying it seems like The Walking Dead, things happen for the worse at random times when it seems like things are looking up. And it seems like that's always kind of the Rockets' persona. It's the Rockets' MO, is that it seems like whenever something is looking up, something bad almost always certainly follows it. So I'm thinking, okay, what's going to happen next type stuff. And I think that's kind of I hate saying this, but the plague in terms of the Rockets style is getting just one thing after another, especially injury-wise. It seems like 4 or 5 injuries always happen at one time for Houston in the worst of times.
For me, this one went to watchability. I didn't have the TV shows. I got to be honest, Nick, they're getting tough. They're getting tough when we're halfway through. I feel like I haven't watched any TV shows now. I went with South Park. Not a show that I watch as frequently as I did when I was still developing and and scoping my sense of what I thought was funny. But there's a lot of episodes of South Park, especially in the middle part, that I think are hilarious and funny, and they're entertaining. And I think the Rockets' play style, having Westbrook and Harden, will be entertaining, and I'll find some joy in that.
Yeah, and South Park is always kind of fun. You could always find some fun in the Rockets too. I went with Mindhunter, the Netflix original, and it's kind of based off of watchability, but the plot of the show is the FBI agents are kind of coming on serial killer profiling for the first time and developing that, and kind of relate to James Harden changing the game with a step back three. And this year, I think he's trying to do like that one-legged three, so kind of a catch there. But always a pleasure talking hoops with you guys. Give yourself a nice shout out.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at dpence_. I actually changed the username just recently. So you can follow me there on Twitter, and then continue to follow the OTG basketball account.
You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at KWALHoops, KWAL Hoops. And be sure to check out the Full Access Hoops podcast, another OTG basketball podcast.
And be sure to head to Off the Glass, OTGbasketball.com. And like Dalton said, follow us on Twitter at OTG Basketball. Head to Design Tree, grab some merch. And if you want to check out any other shows, head to iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGbasketball.com, Google Play, Dash Radio, and YouTube. And also big thanks to these two for taking the time to record.
Peace out, Knuckleheads.